I mean, so going back to that, 1850, like Second Industrial Revolution, viewpoint, there were definitely craftsmen who had gotten really, really good with a number 3 file to get, a barrel to fit onto a stock, right? And that specific skill set, once we, when we started mass producing stuff and got, manufacturing tolerances down to the point where you didn't need that craftsman in the loop anymore, that one craftsman's job maybe was no longer as valuable as it had been before, or maybe it wasn't even needed. And so there was a shift, right? And I think we'll probably see a shift in networking as well. Maybe not quite as drastic, again, because I think there's, it's not a perfect analogy.
Welcome to the Baxtel podcast, where we uncover the cloud from the data center. I'm your host, Eric Bell, and today we're joined by Chris Grundemann. Chris is the managing director of Grundemann Technology Solutions and founder of FullCtl, and he's the founder of the Imposter Syndrome Network podcast. He's authored 2 books. He holds 8 patents in network technology and is an author of RFC. He once, and I found this on the internet, actually AI found this on the internet, he once ran for office for the Colorado State Senate. That'd be interesting to hear about. Chris, I really appreciate you joining us for our second episode ever. Welcome.
Hey, Eric, thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. I tried to combine those 2 statements into one. That didn't work.
It's all good. Earlier this year, you coordinated a survey at NANOG. It was a State of the Network Automation survey. Did you find anything interesting, or can you summarize that a bit?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the middle of kind of going through the data and graphing stuff out and doing a bunch of analysis on it. I'm going to present the results back to the next NANOG meeting in June in Seattle. So, the highlight is that although we've been talking about network automation, at least publicly, right? There's lots of blog posts, there's lots of white papers, there's tons of presentations at NANOG, at RIPE, at Apricot, at LACNOG. I mean, all the NOGs, all the NUFs, everywhere we get a chance, we're talking about network automation and have been for years, right? And to me, this goes all the way back to like 2011, I want to say, when like OpenFlow came out and like SDN hit the waves, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, like SDN's amazing, it's going to change the world. And we talked a lot about SDN. People wrote books about SDN. Most of what people wanted from SDN was just automation. And here we are, 2023. And from what I can tell from the survey, as well as just talking to people, we still have not done that much network automation. I mean, there are definitely caveats to that. There are some networks that have just gone full in and have automated the crap out of stuff. There are some really good automation tools out there that have been used by some folks. Although, it kind of looks like a lot of the automation tools are just talking to people and not gaining traction yet. We'll see. It's interesting. SD-WAN probably is one of the most successful automation tools, platforms, methodologies so far, at least in the enterprise space. And that's all showed up in the survey. So, a big part of the survey said that people, are not doing as much automation as they think they could. Companies are not spending money on automation. They're not dedicating engineers or budget to automation. At least, and again, this is generalized, right? I mean, this is across, several dozen folks who've answered the survey. I think we ended up with like 72 respondents, mostly from different companies and kind of across the world, mostly focused in the US. And that's a big part of it, right? Is that, there is some automation going on. People are still doing some scripting here and there. The scripting has advanced to some degree. And there are some folks doing end-to-end full-blown automation. But, one striking thing was, for like, hey, we're 90% automated or we're 100% automated, 0 responses to either one of those. Everything else fell at 80% or below, and the heavier weight was below 50%. So I think the difference to me in the last couple of years is that we've moved from, people were talking about automation, but no one was doing anything. And again, generalizing here, very, very, very few people were doing anything about automation 4 or 5 years ago. And now people, at the very least, are dabbling. They're getting more aware of it, and they believe that they should or need to in a lot of cases, I think. And again, I'm generalizing. I'm using some terms here. I'm not putting percentages and things in there, but Generally, I think that's been the shift over the last couple of years, as we went from talking about automation but no one really wanting to do it, to now we're talking about it and people kind of sheepishly know they should be doing it and like actually believe that this is something that's going to happen and that needs to happen.
I see. Yeah, it's been, I think it was 2003 when I last had my enable on a network. And so it's been a while since I've been in there configuring. And at that time, it was all manual. So it sounds like network automation, at least at a high level, can span the gamut from scripts, simple scripts, or perhaps a web interface, a GUI web interface where you enter, configure a customer, and then it will go out to the network and provision that customer. Perhaps, I'm guessing. But I'm sure that with the advent of more advanced AI, would that be under the umbrella of network automation? Or
I think it definitely can be. I think there are places, and we've seen, again, kind of in the enterprise tooling space, maybe somewhat on the service writer space, this kind of latest buzzword is AI ops. And so AI is definitely getting in there in certain ways. I think it makes sense that there will be this future where, artificial intelligence, machine learning of different sorts will be part of this kind of, closed loop automation cycle. I think in a lot of ways, AI is very interesting. It's just one more tool, in my opinion, at this point, especially from a networking perspective. I think from a network automation perspective, we are essentially where physical manufacturing was in around 1850, 1860, right? Like we are primed for the second industrial revolution. And what I mean by that is, if you look at like the way things were manufactured in the early 1800s versus the late 1800s, in the US, but also in the UK and around the world to some degree, before this revolution, everything was handmade and handcrafted, right? Rifles are one of the examples. I don't necessarily love war or killing people, but it's a really good example of kind of manufacturing because it was going on a lot at that time. And, rifles were actually, there was a craftsman involved in every step of manufacturing a rifle, to the point where when pieces came out of like the forge or the stand, whatever there was machines involved in helping make the rifles. But when the piece came out, it would have to be like filed and polished, and like there was a hands-on process of like really crafting this thing to fit together. And so when you put a rifle together, if you took that rifle apart, you had to put it back together with the exact same parts, or they wouldn't fit. Even two rifles made by the same company on the same day, if you took them apart and swapped the parts, you could not make it work, because every piece was like handcrafted and bespoke. And I think, hopefully, in this analogy, you're starting to hear like the way that we design networks. Every engineer on the CLI configures things slightly differently. Maybe they're literally following the same architectural plan, but they're using a slightly different way to do that in the syntax. And so these things are a little bit different. They don't quite fit together, right? And I think that's where we're at. And so I think standardization and automation are the next steps. And I think as we do that, we'll see, potentially a big shift in networking across the board when we kind of, put the assembly line in place, right? And actually start, mass producing networks. And maybe it's not mass production. I mean, the analogy is not quite right, because maybe networks are more like railroads than they are like, guns or sewing machines. But I think there's something to be learned there about where we're at in history.
right. I mean, there's the legend of the 10x software development engineer. Where one developer is worth 10 other developers, right? They're just that good because they're that efficient. Their architecture, the way they build the software is that much more efficient and that sort of thing. Now, with the advent of AI or generative AI, average developers can be 10x developers. At least that's the theory, right? Or at least they can be just as fast as a 10x developer. Do you see the same thing happening with network operations and network engineering? And with that, and this is probably even a more complex question, but will network engineering jobs disappear? When you make network engineers more efficient with AI and scripting.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple things on that. So one, just back to the AI questions. In so many places and so many networks, like basic automation is all that's needed, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, AI is great, and there's a lot of uses for it in a lot of places, especially with especially the new stuff everybody's getting excited about, like ChatGPT and natural language models and large language models and generative AI being able to like make chatbots even better, right? And there's definitely something interesting there about that. But we still we haven't done the standardization yet. We haven't even done like the basic mechanization yet. So to me, for networking, we can do a lot of good before we even really need to play too much with AI. Not that AI doesn't have a place, but we can do a lot of good with much more basic tools that just haven't been used yet. And then onto the jobs thing, I think there's a couple things that are happening, right? One is that networks have become more and more and more fundamental to like everything we do, and they've proliferated and they become more complex. There's more devices making more connections to more other endpoints, all the time. It's much more fuzzy, where one network begins and one network ends. Like interconnection has really proliferated. There's potentially like IoT networks that are working within a larger network that is then connected to maybe a Wi-Fi network for the employees, and then maybe that's connected out to multiple different cloud service providers for your infrastructure as a service platform, and you have a bunch of SaaS platforms. And so I think with the growth and importance and scale and scope of networking, I think that we need all the tools we can just to like not lose our minds. So I don't see jobs going away anytime soon. I do think there's probably shifts that'll happen, right? And I mean, so going back to that 1850 like second industrial revolution viewpoint, there were definitely craftsmen who had gotten really, really good with a number 3 file to get a barrel to fit onto a stock, right? And that specific skill set, once we when we started mass producing stuff and got manufacturing tolerances down to the point where you didn't need that craftsman in the loop anymore, that one craftsman's job maybe was no longer as valuable as it had been before, or maybe it wasn't even needed. And so there was a shift, right? And I think we'll probably see a shift in networking as well. Maybe not quite as drastic, again, because I think there's it's not a perfect analogy, but we've already seen this happen before, right? Like at the top echelons of network engineering, you see the people who move from industry to vendors and back again, right? So there's a number of engineers who have kind of moved. Maybe they work for Cisco or Juniper or Arista or Brocade, and then they invent some new protocol, some new way of doing something, and then they go out and work for service providers and deploy that thing. And then once that's deployed, they kind of come back in, right? And and not that everybody's going to be at that level. Not everyone's going to be a distinguished engineer at Comcast, right? But this kind of shifting has already been happening in a lot of people's careers, and I think we'll just continue to see that. So if you're really, really, really attached to like one specific version of one vendor's CLI, and like that's how you've built your whole career, then yeah, that's a fragile position to be in, right? If you know version 2 of XYZ vendors, X2 3000, software, and that's the only thing that's very fragile. And so I think we're going to be adding different skills and different pieces to that for sure.
Yeah, the telegraph operator needed to be flexible and learn new skills as the telegraph kind of phased out and the telephone kind of phased in. There's a shift there, and I think technology is moving faster than ever, and I think you just really need to be really flexible and continue to learn.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's why you got into technology in the first place, right? I mean, like that was, I mean, like, that's what I signed up for, was never getting bored.
Right. And I guess, yeah, you can get set in your ways and learn, just stay with what you know, but it might hurt you in the long run if that technology runs past you. Yeah. Interesting. Let's see. So partly where networks, intersect with data centers, right? Your expertise is more in the networking side, is OpenIX, and you're involved with the OpenIX organization. But do you have any updates of what OpenIX has been up to in the last year or so?
Yeah. So maybe more than the last year, so a couple of things. So one, OpenIX is now OIX. We went through a rebrand and wanted to kind of keep continuity there, which is why it's now OIX. But like a few other, brands that have gone before us, it doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's just OIX is the name now. And part of that was because we do see, the role changing a little bit. Obviously, OIX still holds standards for fair and non-discriminatory access to interconnection facilities, right? And so there's OIX1, which is a standard for internet exchange operators. And then there's OIX2, which is for data center operators. And again, both of those really talk about not necessarily the technical details, but how are you transparent and open about the way you do things and how things work and how customers can come on board. And it's just about, again, openness and transparency in general, and making sure that things are fair and non-discriminatory. The newest standard is OIX3, which is for edge data centers. And again, it's not the whole package for an entire edge data center. It's really looking at the interconnection piece of it. But you can get your, edge facility certified with OIX3 to show that you are, not only an edge data center, but you're operating in a way that is, again, following these FRAND policies and kind of open and transparent and making sure that, interconnection can actually flourish in your facility. So the rebrand and OIX3 are kind of big ones. Outside of that, again, it's been a couple years now, at least. But all of the OIX standards are ANSI standards. So OIX is an accredited standards body by ANSI, which happened, in the last few years anyway. And the OIX standards are ANSI standards as well, which is pretty cool, I think.
Cool. Yeah, good. Yeah, interconnection is robust but also fragile at the same time. You have in any one city you have likely just one or two, maybe three buildings that really conduct that interconnection for that region, and so you don't want to have any one company kind of squash that, right? I mean, perhaps their policies they can. We've seen over time where interconnection facilities have been kind of slowly replaced. You have the May East, May West. May East, it kind of slowly transitioned over to Equinix Ashburn, that sort of thing. So, but it takes a long time, and there's a bit of pain involved with it in the industry to transition. But I think the OpenX helps to. It sounds like it helps to guide, guide the industry in a way, guide the participants.
Yeah. And as far as those trend lines go, too, I guess that's another thing that's fairly new. Up on the OIX.org website, there is a tool called the Interconnection Navigator, which was built by the OIX team, which is basically, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a visual front end for PeerDB data. But what it does is it also looks back in time, so you can look at trends and things. So if you want to see how the interconnection market has changed in a specific area over time, you can chart that all out through this tool, which is kind of neat. And just look at kind of how those things happen. And it looks at, you can look at it at the continent level. You can drill into a specific continent. You can drill into specific countries, specific cities. You can look at like number of ASNs, number of ports, sizes of ports. Again, it's basically all the PeerDB data, but it's historical, and it'll graph it kind of in a lot of different ways for you.
Interesting. I have to check that out. I didn't know PeerDB, or at least something's capturing the changes over time. It sounds like interesting. Okay. It looks like speaking of peering, interconnection, data centers, that sort of thing. It looks like you founded last year FullCtl. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so FullCtl, and I'll say it's FullCtl, because I always say FullCtl, and people go look for like FullCtl, like all written out in a word. It's CTL, which kind of harkens back to there's a Unix tool that used that CTL moniker, and that kind of Unix philosophy is a big part of what drives what we're doing. So myself and Matt Griswold, Grizz, who happens to be the architect of the Interconnection Navigator, as well as the architect and maintainer of PeerDB. Him and I have gotten together to kind of take a bunch of software that he's written over the last 15 years and dust it off in some ways, open source as much of it as we can, and then we've also set it up as a platform, so it's like a SaaS offering, and it's basically intent-based networking, so all the network automation stuff we were talking about, but really, really specifically focused on interconnection. And so the two big tools that are available right now, one is called IXCtl and one is called PeerCtl. You can see the naming convention kind of playing through there. IXCtl, as you might guess, is an internet exchange point in an internet exchange platform. It basically automates route server creation and configuration and maintenance, as well as member management for an internet exchange point. And then PeerCtl is kind of the other side of that coin in some ways. It's for networks who do interconnection, and it basically has a workflow manager to, if you're looking for peering relationships, there's actually like an email workflow manager in there to like, have that conversation and connect person to person with other networks to find out, where you can connect and how you can connect, or to negotiate those agreements. And then the main core of it, though, beyond that workflow manager, is an automation tool, again, to basically automate configuration of BGP. And so it now works for bilateral peering, for multilateral peering, for transit, for transport, PNIs, anything you're doing with BGP. Particularly eBGP, we don't have constructs in there for like internal meshes and route servers and stuff, or route reflectors and things like that. But as far as like eBGP connections go, for interconnection between your network and someone else's, it'll handle all that configuration. And so the idea there is, kind of going back to your point, I don't think that there's any risk of taking people's jobs away. I think that from what I can tell, especially on the interconnection front, for so many people, for so many companies, BGP is still a four-letter word. And finding, CCIEs or JNCIEs or whatever, folks who really understand BGP and interconnection and traffic engineering is really, really, really tough. And it's really, really scary for a lot of companies. But it can benefit both them and the networks that they connect to, get a little bit better at some of this. And so we're hoping that this software will help people be able to kind of take that leap and really kind of look at, oh, wait a minute, like I'm connecting to maybe a NAS vendor and an SD-WAN vendor and like 3 cloud vendors, and I've got, employees working from home all over the world. Like I actually probably need an interconnection strategy. We may not be able to help with the actual strategy of figuring all that out. That you probably still need, somebody to, maybe a consultant or somebody on the team to really understand kind of how and where to interconnect. But then actually getting those configurations done, we can help with that.
Wow. Yeah. When I was back in 2003, the last time I had Enable, one of my expertises was in BGP and in configuring sessions with other peers, right? And I remember there's always a fear of God in me for misconfiguring and leaking a full table to peers, right? And I don't know, I don't think it happens as often anymore, but I think that it sounds like perhaps PeerCtl would help not enable you to leak, because I know that was one of my biggest fears is turn up the connection and actively advertising a full table rather than just our routes.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's one of the things too is a automation platform like this, an intent-based automation platform like this, it allows someone to come in, right, a BGP architect to come in and set policy and say, hey, here's how we're going to do things, and then it allows essentially almost infinitely sized team, however you want to do it. You want to hand it over to provisioners, you want to hand it over to the tier 1 NOC, like whoever you need, who don't necessarily need to understand BGP policy and order of operation. Somehow I accidentally muted. That was fun. You don't need to understand all that stuff. You just say, okay, I want to connect these two things together, and then the machine knows all the policy and all the configuration that goes into that to make it happen in a safe way. Right? We've built in RPKI and being able to do like ROA validation and all that stuff if you want it. So yeah, exactly. Right? It kind of takes the fear out of it.
Indeed. Question in regards to it changing the subject just slightly in a bit. So it looks like you were introduced to the IPv6 Hall of Fame. Is that the case?
Yes. And
did that come with a trophy, or who did you thank in your acceptance speech?
Yeah, no, it's pretty. Lackluster is the wrong term. It's a pretty just like I was told that I was inducted, and that was kind of it. My name's on a website somewhere. Nice. So, take it for what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm not inducted into any Hall of Fame. Yeah. That could be a crowning thing because, I don't think many people are, at least on our level or our industry, are in a Hall of Fame. And so for you to be in a Hall of Fame, that's pretty good. Question in terms of this is a little bit more of a random question, but it looks like you have a ladder in the background there. What is that ladder for?
Yeah, so there is a ladder behind me. It's a step ladder because if I move my webcam, you can see there's actually books up there.
Oh my! Oh, cool.
the ceiling in here is higher than I can reach, and there's books all the way up.
Nice, classic library ladder. I like it.
It doesn't like slide around the room, which I think would be pretty cool. Someday maybe I'll have a house where I have like a ladder that's on a wheel that I can like, slide, and like I think there's a movie or something, maybe Sound of Music, where they're like singing and like sliding around on ladders in the library. So if I can someday recreate that, I'll have a full life.
Awesome. Yes. When FullCtl goes public,
Yeah, sure.
you can buy that house with that library in it. One question in terms of IPv4 versus IPv6. It seems like the industry, even when I was a network engineer, the industry was transitioning to IPv6.
Mm-hmm.
It's still happening now. I guess it's a loaded question to say why haven't we, transitioned yet? But do you think we'll ever transition? And maybe that's a loaded question in itself.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult thing, I think, to transition to IPv6 for the industry.
It's super, super tough, right? There's a really good book, I think, what's her name? Barbara Van Schweck? Well, I'll have to get you the actual book and like put it in the show notes or something because, but she wrote a book, she's a brilliant lady, and she wrote a book I think it's called Internet Architectures. And it goes into like, kind of like a little bit more academic and theoretical look at like how all this stuff kind of works together. And again, I forget all the terms. I'm terrible at attribution and paraphrasing. But essentially, the internet protocol itself is, you can think of it as kind of this like thin stem, almost like on an hourglass. And above IP, it broadens out into what would maybe look like a wine cup or something. But then it also does that below. And so the whole idea is that IP is this protocol that is a translation protocol almost. And so IP is really, really, really cool because you can use almost any protocol below it in the stack, meaning what's on the wire. So right now we almost always use Ethernet, but that doesn't have to be the case, right? Fiber channel works just as good. And there's other things that work fine too, right? There's other layer 2 protocols and layer 1 protocols, right? The layer 1 stuff is the one where we still do a lot of different stuff. You can use Wi-Fi, you can use fiber, you can use copper, right? There's this physical protocols that have to be used on these different mediums, and none of that matters because IP just takes it all, right? And then the same thing happens above, where we usually use TCP and UDP at that layer 4, but it goes beyond that up above. Right now, a lot of what we do on the internet is HTTP, but it doesn't have to be, right? We also get to use SSL, and so we do encrypted stuff. And there's also all kinds of other, protocols out there for video and voice and even messaging and like I said, we've kind of come to HTTP in a lot of ways, but that could change at any time. And the reason is because, again, IP is this like almost translating protocol there, right? So that's what makes it really, really powerful. But it also makes it really, really fragile in trying to change it. Or maybe not fragile, but it's just tough to change because everything in the whole stack above and the whole stack below is dependent on this IP layer. And so then when you're trying to swap out the IP layer, that becomes really, really difficult. And so that's the biggest challenge with IPv6 is it's not backwards compatible. And other than that, it's a great protocol. There's a few other things, right? Like extension headers were a great idea on paper that maybe isn't that great in the real world. One of the challenges I think with IPv6 is that it was designed when people first realized IPv4 wasn't big enough and that this experiment had escaped the lab, right? Vint Cerf and Bob Conn are like, crap, the internet's taking off. There's not enough addresses. There was other people involved, obviously, as well. And they said, we need a different protocol with more addresses. And this all happened, like 20, 25 years ago, right? And so at the time, they saw that V4 wasn't going to be enough to handle a global internet. But at the time, the deployment was very, very small. And so there was no reason for backwards compatibility. And it was also a different world where security and some other things weren't as important as they are now on a global commercial internet. And so that's some of the biggest challenges with IPv6 is that it's almost as old as IPv4. And you see some of that age and some of the things that happen with it today. A lot of that's been ironed out. And so it really just comes down to, okay, how hard is it to build a new network, a new IP network alongside your existing IP network? Now, dragging your feet and not doing it is part of the problem too. This probably could have been done if people had just done it. But, on a business side, you've got to have a reason.
It seems to me, though, and I'm, again, pretty distant to this because I know there are a lot of passionate people on both sides. But it seems to me that it's IPv6 is like doing a new language. I mean, subnetting in IPv4 is fairly easy. It seems, right? Somewhat easy, right?
Like once you know how to do it, maybe, yeah.
It's more it's more conceptual. I can see it and I can understand. Okay, that's a /28. That's a /24. It's I can see it and understand it, and it's not necessarily from a math perspective, but it's more intuitive to me. And perhaps maybe if I look at IPv6 and work with IPv6 more, it might be intuitive.
I think it's a familiarity thing.
Yeah, but when you get to alphanumeric, it feels harder.
Yeah, I mean, hex does definitely open up the field a little bit, right? It feels differently, but you learn where the nibble boundaries are. And the other thing is, again, so going back to let's stop banging rocks together and use some tools. Have an IPAM. Why are you subnetting even IPv4 in your head or on a spreadsheet, right? Like, write or buy or use, find a free open source, like a decent IP address manager and let it do subnetting for you and set up the policies and let the tools work for you a little bit more. I think that's part of the problem too, right? And that's one thing that'll help with IPv6 just as much as any other networking problem.
And so maybe that, kind of tying it to the themes earlier that we talked about, maybe it's when we use more network automation is when there'd be more adoption with IPv6.
Maybe.
We're less reliant on manual
Very true.
configuration, stuff like that. So curious. So let's move on to the last section because I know we need to wrap up pretty soon. And I would love if you could give a pick or two. Kind of a top pick that you find useful in your life that other people here listening might find useful in their life.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I think, for me, one of the most useful things in my life is my morning routine. And that may sound pedestrian, I don't know, but, for me, I basically have a set time that I want to be sitting down in front of my computer to do work at. And so I back out from there how much time I need to do all the things I want to do in the morning. For me, it's pretty long. I wake up probably like 2.5, 3 hours before I want to be at work, and that's with no commute. Because, I go out for a run in the morning, and I sit down and do meditation, and I sit down and do journaling. And there's a few other things I put in there. I take some vitamins and drink some green tea. And so, it's not necessarily that, any specific morning routine. I think everybody's is probably going to be a little bit different. But for me, I know that there's a few things that are important, right? So I think that, having a healthy and strong mind, having a healthy and strong body, having a healthy and strong heart, and a healthy and strong soul, right? Those kind of 4 pillars are really needed. And however you want to define those things, right? But they are, they do reinforce each other in a lot of ways, I think. And so for me, a big part of the morning routine is that I get to take care of myself in all of those ways before I even start my day. And so for me, after my morning routine, where I've taken care of my body and my mind and my, my heart and my spirit, and so I've connected with meaning in some way. I've connected with, with my feelings and myself in some way. I've strengthened my body and used my mind in some ways. I do some reading in the morning usually. I can kind of check all those things off my list. And by the time I sit down for work at 7 or 8 a.m., my day is already a success. I've already done everything that I had to do that day. For me, it's all done, right? And so now all of a sudden, my entire workday is bonus round.
Wow.
And I find it a really great way to live.
That's interesting. And I don't do that now in terms of a morning routine. I know that I feel like aspirationally I want to. Have you done some A/B, in other words, A/B tests? Where you might have skipped out on running or skipped out on journaling because you're short on time, you're traveling or something like that, and how does that affect your day if you don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, for sure. So I tend to, so for me, a lot of it hooks off of the run. So getting up and like when I wake up bleary eyed and I don't want to get out of bed, like have that moment of like willpower to like get out of bed, put my shoes and shorts on and go out for a run. That's the key trigger. And then after that, everything becomes really easy. Because the run wakes me up, I got some good chemicals going in my body, the endorphins and stuff is going, and everything else then kind of just like triggers off of that. And there's a bunch of work on this around habits. There's a couple books. One's called The Power of Habit, and one's called I think it's called Atomic Habits. Those two are really good, kind of 1-2 punch for a lot of this stuff, and they break down how habits actually work. which is like this, there's a trigger, and then there's a attention and a reward. I'm not going to do a very good job of explaining it, but you can like do this like habit stacking where like the trigger for the next habit is the one before it, and so you do this routine. So I find that the order definitely does matter. And then, but yeah, so I squeeze out certain things. So on a day when like I have early meetings, I'll do a shorter run, and maybe I won't journal because there's not quite enough time to sit down and do that, right? And I mean the whole thing, it's developed over years, right? This is definitely like I'm probably really consciously thinking about morning routine and like doing these things. Is 4 or 5 years of kind of developing, the one that works for me, and how it works. And then consistency is still always an issue, right? But what I find is the more consistent I am, one, I have a better day, but then because I had a better day, it makes it easier for me to be more consistent with the routine because you get reinforced and you see the good effects of it.
I love it. That's good. And with that, we're about out of time. How can the audience find more about you, find more about your consulting services, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So chrisgrundemann.com online is probably the best resource. You can also find me on LinkedIn, but chrisgrundemann.com should have links out to everything else. FullCtl is out there, FullCtl.com as well. But again, if you find me on LinkedIn or go to chrisgrundemann.com, that should have links out to all the rest of stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
I want to learn about you, and let's do it in a really brief capsule of approximately 60 seconds. So, late nights or early mornings?
Late nights.
New York or California?
New York.
Sweet or salty?
Sweet.
Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Introvert or extrovert?
Introvert.
Ambivert, maybe?
Yeah, some of these are not as binary as you may think.
Phone or text?
Text.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction. I don't remember which one was which for a second there.
The smartest person you know?
I know too many smart people. There's no way to answer that question.
Favorite food?
Thai green curry with chicken, maybe pork. That's where I'm at.
Favorite sport?
Wrestling was my sport forever. I'm not a wrestler anymore. I'm an old man now, but wrestling.
What was your first job?
I mean, essentially digging ditches and mowing lawns. So I was a landscaper first, I think. Yeah.
Cabinet or rack?
Rack.